She was 16 years old. She had red hair, a perfect smile, and two words she lived by every single day of her life. Carpe diem. Seize the day. On the morning of December 14th, 1991, she rushed out of her front door in her drill team uniform, curlers still wrapped tight in her hair, and she drove herself to school. She thought she was late. She was not late. She was almost a full hour early. And in that cold, empty parking lot, on the most freezing Saturday morning of the year, she sat alone in her car with a container of orange juice resting on the passenger seat. She was just waiting. A 16-year-old girl, alone, in the quiet. And somewhere just beyond that parking lot, hidden inside the thick bushes along the edge of the school campus, something was already watching her. And by the time her teammates arrived that morning, Sarah Yarborough would be gone, and the person who took her would not be found for 32 years. This is the story of how a 16-year-old girl fought back in her final moments, left behind the evidence that would one day destroy her killer, and how her case became the first cold case in history to be solved using consumer DNA databases. This is the story of a system that failed 3 separate times, of a predator who should have been behind bars the morning Sarah drove to school, of 2 13-year-old boys who stumbled into the worst moment of their lives, and of a family that waited 3 decades for justice. Drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching this, and tell me what time it is over there right now as you are watching. Now, I want to see every corner of the globe in that comment section. You are watching Crime Files America, and this case is going to stay with you. Before you hear what happened, you need to understand who was lost. Because Sarah Yarborough was not just a name in a police report. She was not just a photograph on a missing persons flyer. She was a real, breathing, extraordinary human being who had a whole life planned out in front of her. Sarah Louise Yarborough was born on June 12, 1975, in Portland, Oregon. Her family moved to Federal Way, Washington when she was 8 years old. By the time she reached high school, she had become the kind of person that people noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because she gave it so freely to everyone around her. She had that bright red hair you could not miss in a crowd, and her mother said her smile could light up any room she walked into. She was an honors student. She loved math and science. She loved art. She loved to read. She was not the kind of girl who was good at one thing. She was good at everything she tried, and she tried everything. Sarah was a member of her school drill team. She was active in her church youth group at Bible Baptist Church. She danced with a performance group called the Safety Kids, a team that traveled to inspire young people to make positive choices in life. That group took her all the way to New Zealand to perform when she was just 15 years old. 15, and she had already seen more of this world than most adults ever will. She wanted to see more. She told her mother she did not want to go to a state college. She wanted to go somewhere far away, somewhere she had never been. She wanted to explore every inch of this world. She had 2 ideas for her future. Either she would become a museum curator, or she would become an engineer like her father. Her mother always said she was secretly rooting for the museum curator. But more than any of that, more than the grades and the dancing and the traveling, the thing every single person who knew her remembered most was how kind she was. She helped her 2 younger brothers with their homework every night. She was always the first to show up when someone needed something. She did not wait to be asked. She just helped. Her mother, Laura, described her as the delight of her life. She said Sarah was the kind of person who built bridges between people, who brought everyone together in her own quiet, gentle way. Sarah had a motto, 2 words, carpe diem, seize the day. Those were not just words, she said. They were something she believed in, something she practiced every single morning when she opened her eyes. And that is what makes what happened to her so unbearable. Because on December 14th, 1991, someone stole every single one of her remaining days. It was Friday, December 13th, 1991. The Yarborough family was getting ready to leave town for the weekend. Sarah's younger brother had a soccer game in Ocean Shores, about 2 hours away. The whole family was going, everyone except Sarah. She had plans. Her drill team had a competition the next morning, and she had other things going on too. Her entire weekend was mapped out. She asked her parents if she could stay home alone while they were away, and her mother Laura was not comfortable with this. Leaving her 16-year-old daughter home alone gave her pause, but Sarah pushed back. She did not want to miss the competition. She did not want to miss her plans. Eventually, her parents agreed, but only under one condition. A friend had to come over and stay with her. Sarah agreed. That Friday night, Sarah and a group of friends went to a basketball game. Perfectly normal, fun. Afterward, Sarah and the friend who was sleeping over stopped to grab fast food and snacks on the way home. They were 16 years old. They were carefree. They grabbed their junk food, went back to Sarah's house, and settled in for the night. 2 teenage girls laughing, talking, eating snacks, doing exactly what teenage girls do on a Friday night. There was nothing unusual about any of it. Nothing that felt dangerous. Nothing that made anyone uneasy. It was just a Friday night, and there was absolutely nothing, not a single sign in the world, that would make any of them think that by the next morning everything would be destroyed forever. Right here, right now, before we go any further, I need you to think about something. You know someone like Sarah. You have known someone like her your whole life. The girl who always showed up. The girl who never made it about herself. The girl whose laugh you can still hear if you close your eyes. This channel exists to make sure people like Sarah are never forgotten. And if you have not subscribed to Crime Files America yet, I want you to ask yourself one question. If this were someone you loved, if this were your sister or your daughter or your best friend, how would you want her story told to an empty room? Hit that subscribe button, because the people in these stories deserve an audience who cares. And if you care, you already know what to do. Saturday morning came. Sarah woke up and immediately panicked. She looked at the clock and thought she was late. Her drill team was supposed to meet at Federal Way High School to board a bus to Juanita High School in Kirkland for the competition. She jumped out of bed. She threw on her drill team uniform. She did not take the curlers out of her hair. She did not have time. She said a quick goodbye to her sleeping friend and ran out the door. She drove to the school. Her father's car pulled into the back parking lot of Federal Way High School at around 8 o'clock in the morning. She parked. And then she waited. Because Sarah was wrong about the time. The drill team did not need to be there until 9 o'clock. She was almost a full hour early. There was no one else from the team there yet. The parking lot was mostly empty. The school was completely silent. It was a Saturday morning in December, and the temperature outside was brutal. Ice had formed overnight in the puddles. The world was still and gray and cold. Sarah sat in the car. A large container of orange juice she had made that morning rested on the passenger seat beside her. Just a 16-year-old girl in her drill team uniform, curlers still in her red hair, sitting alone in a nearly empty parking lot on the coldest morning of the year. And somewhere, hidden in the thick bushes just a few hundred feet away, someone was already there. Someone was already watching. While Sarah sat in that car, the 2 boys were waking up just a few blocks away. They had no idea that within the hour they would witness something that would never leave them for the rest of their lives. 13-year-old Drew Miller had a friend named Adam staying over. They had done what 13-year-olds do, stayed up late, talked, laughed, fallen asleep when they finally ran out of things to say. When Saturday morning came, they parked themselves in front of the television. They watched cartoons. They ate cereal. The world outside was freezing cold, but inside, everything was warm and easy. It was the kind of morning you never think twice about. After a while, the boys decided to head out. They wanted to go skateboarding. There was a grocery store nearby with a good parking lot for skating. To get there faster, the boys did what they always did. And they hopped the fence at the edge of the school campus and cut straight through the grounds. A shortcut they had used dozens of times before. Nothing special, just routine. As they walked across the campus, they did what any kids would do. They stomped on the ice in the frozen puddles. They cracked it under their shoes. It sounded like breaking glass. They laughed. Two boys on a Saturday morning, stomping ice and heading to go skate. That is all it was supposed to be. And then Drew looked up. Ahead of them, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, a man stepped out of the bushes. He just appeared. 1 second, the path ahead was empty. The next second, he was standing there. He had come up from a low area near what used to be a dugout, a spot surrounded by thick bushes tall enough to hide a person completely. The man stood up straight and looked directly at them. He stared at the two boys. Then, without saying a single word, he turned and started walking in the same direction they were headed. Drew felt something twist deep in his stomach. Something about this man did not feel right. But he was 13. He did not know what to do with that feeling. So he did what most people do when something feels wrong, but nothing has technically happened yet. He talked himself out of it. He told himself the guy had probably just been hiding in the bushes to smoke. That was all. Just some guy who did not want to be seen. Nothing weird, nothing dangerous, but Drew kept watching him. He could not stop. Then the boys reached the spot where the man had come from, the low area near the dugout, and what they saw there ended their childhood in an instant. A young woman was lying in the dirt. She was not moving. Her eyes were open, staring up at the sky, staring up at the two boys who had just walked into the worst moment of their lives. Drew and Adam froze. This was not something that happened in real life. Not in their neighborhood. Not at their school. Not on a Saturday morning when they were supposed to be skateboarding. Then Drew looked back up. The man, the same man who had stepped out of those bushes just moments earlier, was now standing further ahead near a vehicle, and he had stopped walking. He had turned around, and he was staring directly at the two boys. Those eyes locked onto Drew like a warning, like he wanted them to know that he saw them, that he knew exactly what they had just found. And Drew would later describe that look as the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced in his life. He called the man the boogeyman, a real, actual boogeyman, not from a movie, not from a nightmare, standing right there in the cold morning light. The boys ran. They turned and sprinted back the way they came, back across the campus, back over the fence, back to Drew's house. Drew's mother saw the panic on their faces and called 911 immediately. Police arrived within minutes. When investigators looked at the clothing near the body, they found a name. The girl lying in the dirt behind Federal Way High School was the same girl who had rushed out of her house that morning with curlers in her hair. The same girl who thought she was late. Sarah Yarborough. Her car was still sitting in the parking lot 300 feet away. The engine had long gone cold. On the front passenger seat, the large container of orange juice sat completely untouched. Not spilled, not knocked over, exactly where Sarah had placed it that morning, waiting for a girl who would never come back. There were no signs of a struggle near the car, no broken glass, no scuff marks, nothing. Sarah had left the safety of that vehicle and walked into those bushes, and she had done it so quickly and so quietly that she did not even have time to knock over a jug of orange juice. I need to stop here for a second, because what comes next is the part of this case that most channels will never tell you. The part that involves a system failure so enormous that it will make your stomach drop. The part about what happened before Sarah. The part about a predator who should have been in a prison cell that morning. If you are not subscribed to this channel, you are about to miss the most important part of this story, and I am not going to repeat it. This is the kind of information that only the people who stay get to hear, so if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because what I am about to tell you changes everything about this case. When investigators processed the scene, they found something that gave everyone connected to this case a small but significant piece of strength. Sarah Yarborough had not gone quietly. DNA evidence was recovered from her clothing. The crime lab developed a full male DNA profile of her attacker. And then they found something underneath Sarah's own fingernails. DNA, her attacker's DNA, and torn from his body by her own hands as she fought for her life. A 16-year-old girl in her drill team uniform, in those freezing bushes on that freezing morning, had scratched and clawed at the person attacking her. She had fought with everything she had. She had marked him. And in doing so, she left behind the evidence that would one day, 32 years later, destroy him. Investigators also worked to understand how Sarah had been lured from her car. Early on, they believed someone may have approached her and asked for help, said they lost their dog or could not find their keys. Sarah, being who she was, would have said yes without hesitation. But years later, when prosecutors finally identified a suspect and studied his history, they developed a darker theory. Based on his documented pattern of past crimes, they believed he most likely used a weapon, a knife, to force Sarah from her car. He had done it before, multiple times. He would approach women near their vehicles, make small talk, then pull a blade to control them. He would force them to walk somewhere more secluded. That is likely what happened to Sarah Yarborough. She did not follow a stranger out of kindness. She had a knife at her throat and no choice. Drew Miller and his friend Adam sat down with a police sketch artist and described the man they had seen in detail. White male, around 6 feet tall, medium build. But one feature stuck with both boys more than anything else: his skin. The man had uneven, rough skin on his face, like acne scarring, like something was visibly wrong with the surface of his complexion. Textured, noticeable even from a distance. And the sketch was released immediately, posted everywhere: store windows, telephone poles, every business in Federal Way, on the news, in the newspapers. The tips started pouring in, hundreds, then thousands. By the time the investigation was in full swing, over 3,000 tips had come in. The volume was so massive that Sarah's own grandfather facilitated the donation of a computer system to the King County Sheriff's Office just to help organize and track all of the information. 3,000 people thought they recognized that face. 3,000 phone calls. 3,000 names and theories and suspicions. Not one of them led to an arrest. Not a single one. The community of Federal Way was living in fear. Parents tightened curfews. Families double-locked their doors at night. People looked at their neighbors differently. Because the man in that sketch could have been anyone. The guy at the grocery store, the person sitting beside you at church. He was out there and nobody knew who he was. For Sarah's friends, the pain went beyond fear. It was guilt. Survivor's guilt. Why am I still here when Sarah is not? Why am I filling out college applications when Sarah wanted that more than anyone? One of Sarah's closest friends, Shannon Grant, was the last person to see Sarah alive on that Friday night. She carried that weight for decades. She wished she could go back. She wished she had asked what time practice really was. She wished she had offered to drive Sarah to school that morning. But none of them could go back. On June 12, 1993, the community gathered at Federal Way High School. It was graduation day. It also would have been Sarah Yarborough's 18th birthday. A man named Bill Fuller had led an effort to build a memorial for Sarah in the school courtyard. Bill was a close family friend. His own daughter had been in Sarah's class. The memorial was a stone bench, inscribed with the 2 words that had defined Sarah's life: Carpe diem, seize the day. Encased in bronze around the bench were her ballet shoes, her books, and a small replica of her beloved dog, Gibby. When it was unveiled that day, with Sarah's younger brother Andrew standing beside Bill Fuller, there were tears everywhere. And that same afternoon, Sarah's mother Laura came to the graduation ceremony, not to mourn. She came to support Sarah's friends, the same girls who had grown up with her daughter. She sat in those bleachers and cheered for every single one of them, because that is what Sarah would have done. Remember the name Bill Fuller, the family friend, the man who built the memorial, because when science finally caught up with this case, his name would come back in a way nobody expected. Now I need to tell you something. Something the people of Federal Way did not learn until decades later. Something that will make your blood run cold. The man who took Sarah Yarborough's life on the morning of December 14th, 1991, had done this before. And he should have still been in a prison cell when it happened. He should have been sitting behind bars the morning Sarah drove to school with curlers in her hair. But he was not. And the reason he was not is a failure so enormous, so preventable, so painfully obvious that once you hear it, you will never look at this case the same way again. We need to go back 8 years, to June of 1983. A 21-year-old woman named Ann Croney had driven to a park along the Columbia River in Richland, Washington. She wanted to sit by the water and think. A man walked up to her. He was 19 years old. He seemed friendly. He said his name was Pat Nicholas. They talked for a few minutes, just small talk. He mentioned he could not swim. And then Ann noticed his voice was changing, getting unsteady. She told him she had to go, turned toward her car, and reached for the door. That is when she felt the knife at her neck. He forced her away from the car, down toward the riverbank, away from the road, away from anyone who could see them. They were halfway down the bank when he told her to stop. And in that moment, standing on the edge of the Columbia River with a man holding a knife, Ann Croney remembered one thing from their conversation just minutes earlier. He said he could not swim. Ann did not think. She ran toward the water and dove in. She swam with everything she had. She swam for her life. The man stood on the bank and did not follow. He could not. People at a nearby dock pulled Ann out of the water. Police were called. And it did not take long to identify the man. His name was Patrick Leon Nicholas. He was 19 years old. And here is where it turns cold. Patrick Nicholas had already been convicted as a juvenile for the assault of 2 women and the attempted assault of a 3rd. His pattern was identical every single time. Approach a woman near her vehicle, make small talk, pull a knife, force her to a more secluded area. And he had done it as a teenager, multiple times. After his arrest for attacking Ann, Nicholas sat in a police interview room and said something investigators would never forget. He said he realized he had dangerous impulses toward young women. He said his intent that day was to commit a serious assault. He said he knew it was not right. He knew what he was. He said it out loud. Nicholas pleaded guilty. Ann Croney stood in front of the judge and asked for the maximum sentence. The judge agreed. Patrick Nicholas was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Ann walked out of that courtroom believing justice had been served. She was wrong. Patrick Nicholas did not serve 10 years. He did not even serve half. In 1987, after serving just 3.5 years of his 10-year sentence, he was released from prison. And he was placed in an outpatient treatment program. And then he vanished off the radar entirely. No one was watching. No one was tracking. No one was paying attention to where Patrick Nicholas went or what he did next. Now think about this carefully. If Nicholas had served every single day of that 10-year sentence, he would not have been released until 1993. He would have still been sitting in a prison cell on the morning of December 14th, 1991. He would have been behind bars when Sarah Yarborough drove to Federal Way High School. If the system had worked the way it was supposed to, Sarah Yarborough would be alive today. She would have graduated, gone to college, become a museum curator or an engineer. She would have lived. But the system did not work. And Sarah paid for that failure with her life. Every single person watching this right now has the power to make sure stories like Sarah's are heard by as many people as possible. You found this channel. That means someone trusted you with this story. And right now, somewhere out there is someone who needs to hear what happened to Sarah Yarborough. Someone who works in law enforcement. Someone studying criminal justice. Someone who has a loved one whose case went cold. Someone who just needs to know the world is paying attention. Share this video right now, not later. Right now, while it is in your hands. And if you have not subscribed to Crime Files America, understand this. Every subscriber tells the algorithm this story matters. Every subscriber means more families like the Yarboroughs get their story told to the world. You are not just clicking a button. You are choosing which stories get heard. Years passed. Then more years. The sketch of the man Drew and Adam had seen stayed pinned to bulletin boards across Federal Way. But the face in that drawing never got a name. Investigators had submitted the DNA from Sarah's crime scene to a national database of convicted offenders and ran it again and again. Every time a new profile was added to the system, detectives checked. Every time the technology improved, they resubmitted. And every single time, the result came back the same. No match. Something was wrong. For a man capable of what was done to Sarah, the idea that he had never committed another crime seemed almost impossible to believe. In 2011, 20 years after Sarah's death, a detective named Jim Allen made a phone call that would eventually change everything. But he reached out to a woman named Colleen Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick ran a company called Identifinders International. She was doing something almost no one in law enforcement had ever heard of. She was using consumer DNA databases, the kind regular people use to find distant relatives and trace their ancestry, to generate investigative leads for unsolved crimes. The field did not even have a proper name yet. Forensic genetic genealogy barely existed. Fitzpatrick would later say that police thought she was not in her right mind. She described being nearly laughed out of rooms when she tried to explain what she could do. But the King County Sheriff's Office had been working Sarah's case for 2 decades. They had tried everything. They were desperate. When Fitzpatrick offered to examine the crime scene DNA for free, just to see if her methods would work, they said yes. What happened next surprised everyone. Fitzpatrick compared the DNA profile from the crime scene to profiles in public genealogy databases. She focused on the Y chromosome, the part of DNA that passes from father to son virtually unchanged across generations. And she found a match, not to the killer himself, to his family line. The Y chromosome from Sarah's crime scene matched a group of people who were all descended from the same man, a man named Robert Fuller. He had lived in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1630s. His family had arrived in North America on the Mayflower. This was the first time in history that a cold case had generated investigative leads using consumer DNA databases. Sarah Yarborough's case was making history without anyone even realizing it yet. The connection to Robert Fuller meant that Sarah's killer was a direct male descendant of this colonial-era family. The Y chromosome had been passed down from father to son for nearly 400 years, but Robert Fuller had thousands of living descendants. Knowing the family line was a start, but the pool was still enormous. And then the name Fuller triggered something with detectives. They already knew a Fuller, Bill Fuller, the family friend, the man who built Sarah's memorial bench. Police asked Bill Fuller to provide a DNA sample. He did not hesitate. He walked in and gave it willingly. He had nothing to hide. When the results came back, his DNA was not a match to the crime scene. Bill Fuller did not harm Sarah Yarborough, but his Y chromosome, the part that traces the male family line, was a match. And Bill Fuller and Sarah's killer shared the same paternal ancestry. They were both descended from Robert Fuller in the 1600s. So investigators were now in the most extraordinary position imaginable. They could trace the killer's bloodline through 4 centuries of American history. They knew his family tree going back to the Mayflower, but they still did not know his name. They still did not know his face. The lead dried up. The case went cold again. In 2018, something massive happened. The Golden State Killer, one of the most notorious criminals in American history, was identified and arrested using the exact same type of DNA database comparison that Colleen Fitzpatrick had pioneered. That case changed everything. It proved to the world that forensic genetic genealogy was real. It worked. And it was going to solve cases that nothing else could. Fitzpatrick's team went back to Sarah's case with renewed energy and better tools. The databases had grown. More people had uploaded their DNA to ancestry sites. The pool of potential matches was bigger. And in September of 2019, 8 years after Fitzpatrick first started working this case, her team made a breakthrough. They identified 2 brothers, Edward Nicholas and Patrick Nicholas. Both men were distant cousins of Bill Fuller. Both were descended from Robert Fuller, but their last name was not Fuller, it was Nicholas. The reason was simple. Their grandfather had been adopted. He was born into the Fuller bloodline but raised under a different name. The genetic connection was real, but it had been hidden behind a legal name change that happened generations ago. And that is why no one had ever found them. The killer's surname did not match his DNA. He had been invisible the entire time. Detectives started with Edward Nicholas. He was a registered sex offender. His DNA had been entered into the national database back in 2005, 14 years earlier. When they checked his profile against the crime scene DNA, it was not a match, which left one person, his younger brother, Patrick Leon Nicholas. Patrick Nicholas was not in any criminal database. Despite everything he had done, the juvenile offenses, the attack on Anne Croney, a conviction in 1993 for harming a young child, his DNA had never been collected for any database. 3 separate times the system had failed to capture his profile. 3 chances to stop him. 3 chances missed. And detectives now believed they knew who had been hiding in those bushes on December 14th, 1991. But believing was not enough. They needed his DNA without him knowing, because if he found out they were watching, he could run. After attacking Anne Croney in 1983, he had withdrawn money from his bank account and fled within hours. So the King County Sheriff's Office put together a surveillance plan. A team of undercover detectives was assigned to follow Patrick Nicholas quietly, carefully, invisibly, and wait for him to leave behind something with his DNA on it. A cup, a napkin, a cigarette butt, anything at all. Patrick Nicholas had no idea anyone was watching. Stop right here for a second. You have stayed this long because something inside you knows this story matters. And you have watched families wait decades for answers. You have watched a system fail a 16-year-old girl. You have watched science slowly chase down a ghost. And what happens next? The surveillance, the arrest, the interrogation, the question he asked that made detectives wonder if there were other victims, is the part that people talk about for years. If this channel disappears from your feed tomorrow because you did not subscribe, you will never know how this ends. The algorithm does not care about fairness. It only shows you what you tell it to. And right now, telling it to keep Crime Files America in your life takes exactly 1 click. Subscribe, because you did not come this far to miss the ending. On September 29, 2019, a team of undercover detectives began following a 55-year-old man through a small town south of Seattle, Patrick Leon Nicholas. He was divorced. He lived alone in a rundown building with no working electricity, no visitors, no friends, no connections. He worked at an auto parts store and took the bus everywhere, a man living completely on the edges of society, invisible, forgotten, exactly the kind of person who could go 28 years without anyone ever suspecting him of anything. But there was one detail that stopped detectives cold. The bus route Patrick Nicholas took regularly passed directly by Federal Way High School, the same school where Sarah Yarborough had been found in December of 1991. Back then, Nicholas was 27 years old. He lived 6 miles from the school, and he had access to that campus every single day. The team waited. They followed. They watched. Then it happened. Detectives trailed Nicholas to a laundromat in Kent. He went inside to do his laundry. After a while, he stepped outside and pulled out a cigarette. He smoked it slowly. Then he lit another. When he was done, he dropped both cigarette butts on the ground. A paper napkin slipped from his pocket and fell to the sidewalk next to them. Nicholas did not pick any of it up. He walked back inside. The moment he was out of sight, the undercover team moved in. They collected both cigarette butts and the napkin from the sidewalk. 3 tiny pieces of garbage a man had thrown away without thinking. They rushed them to the Washington State Patrol crime lab, and then they waited. Every hour felt like a week. Then the call came, and the DNA on the cigarette butts matched the DNA found on Sarah Yarborough's clothing in 1991. A perfect match. The odds of it being anyone other than Patrick Nicholas were 1 in 120 quadrillion. There are only about 8 billion people alive on this earth. The chance this DNA belonged to someone else was essentially 0. 28 years of searching, 3,000 tips. And the answer came from 2 cigarette butts on a sidewalk outside a laundromat. On October 2, 2019, detectives tracked Patrick Nicholas to a sports bar in downtown Kent. They walked in, they identified him, and they placed him under arrest for the first-degree murder of Sarah Yarborough. He was taken to the King County Jail. Prosecutors requested bail of $5 million. Then came the interrogation. And Nicholas was brought into an interview room. Detectives told him they were investigating the death of a young girl named Sarah. And what happened next sent a chill through every detective in that room. Nicholas did not say they had the wrong man. He did not say he had no idea what they were talking about. He did not express confusion or shock or grief. Instead, he asked a question. He asked what year this happened. What year? As if there were multiple years it could have been. As if there were multiple girls it could have been about. That question hung in the air like smoke. He spoke with detectives for about 90 minutes. He did not confess. He did not break down. Then he asked for a lawyer. And he never said another word. The search of his home told its own story. The place was dark. No electricity. These stacks of old newspapers and magazines covered almost every surface. But 2 items stood out from the rest. The first was a newspaper from 1994, old and yellowed, with an article about the Sarah Yarborough case on the front page. He had kept it. For 25 years, Patrick Nicholas had held on to a newspaper about the girl whose life he had taken. It had been sitting in his house the entire time. The second was a photograph torn carefully from a magazine, found alone in a kitchen drawer. It showed a young woman in a cheerleading uniform. When prosecutors showed that photograph in court, the air left the room. Everyone understood what they were looking at. Everyone understood who this man was. 3.5 years passed between the arrest and the trial. On April 17, 2023, more than 31 years after Sarah Yarborough was found behind her high school, the case finally went to trial. Patrick Leon Nicholas, now 59 years old, walked into the courtroom. He sat at the defense table and showed no emotion. Behind the prosecution table, filling the gallery, were the people who had waited a lifetime for this moment. Sarah's mother, Laura, her brother Andrew, her childhood friends. Drew Miller, now a grown man, who had found her body when he was just a boy of 13. Before the trial began, the judge made a ruling that hit the prosecution hard. Patrick Nicholas's criminal history, the juvenile convictions, the attack on Ann Croney, his later offense against a child, none of it could be presented to the jury. The 12 people deciding his fate would never know his documented pattern of violence stretching back to his teenage years. They would only see the evidence from Sarah's case. The prosecution built their entire case around the DNA, the science, the numbers. The defense attacked genetic genealogy itself, calling it untested and unreliable. The attorney argued that police had spent decades chasing dead ends, and in their desperation, grabbed onto the first name the science gave them. He also went after the eyewitness description. Drew and Adam had described the man they saw as having uneven, rough, textured skin on his face. The defense pointed out that Nicholas had clear skin at the time of the crime, but the prosecution had an answer for that. Sarah Yarborough's DNA had been found underneath her own fingernails, and she had scratched her attacker. She had clawed at him in her final moments. The prosecution argued that the textured skin the boys described may not have been acne at all. It may have been fresh scratch marks left by Sarah herself in the final moments of her life. She had marked his face, and those marks were still visible when Drew and Adam saw him walking out of those bushes minutes later. Then came the evidence from his home, the newspaper kept for 25 years, the photograph in the kitchen drawer, and then Sarah's clothing was brought into the courtroom. Her drill team jacket, her shoes, her sweater, sealed in evidence storage for over 30 years. When the retired detective who had first responded to the scene carefully unpacked each item and laid it before the court, and it was like opening a time capsule from the worst morning in Federal Way's history. These were not photographs. These were the actual things Sarah had been wearing when she died. The jacket she had thrown on when she thought she was late. People in the gallery felt themselves break open. The DNA numbers were staggering. Nicholas's DNA matched on 13 out of 13 genetic markers tested. The probability of it being someone else was 1 in 20 quadrillion. The DNA from under Sarah's fingernails was 590 billion times more likely to have come from Nicholas than from any unrelated person. Those were not debatable numbers. That was certainty. The trial lasted 9 days. Then the case went to the jury. They deliberated for a day and a half. When they returned, Sarah's family and friends were shaking, and the foreperson read the first charge, premeditated first-degree murder. The verdict was not guilty. The sound that followed was like the air being punched from the room. But the foreperson kept reading. First-degree murder committed during the commission of an attempted assault. Guilty. Second-degree murder committed while committing indecent liberties. Guilty. And the special verdict? Was the taking of Sarah Yarborough's life sexually motivated? Yes. The courtroom broke open. Sarah's family sobbed. 32 years of silence and suffering poured out of that room. Drew Miller looked across the courtroom and made eye contact with one of the jurors. The juror nodded at him, a small gesture carrying the weight of everything. We heard you. We believed you. We got it right. Patrick Nicholas sat at the defense table through all of it and showed nothing. No remorse, no relief, no fear. The same emptiness he had carried for 32 years. Before we get to the sentencing, I want you to do something. Type in the comments right now what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you are watching this from. I mean it. Every single one of you. Because I want the Yarborough family to one day see that this story reached every corner of the world. That people in countries Sarah never got to visit sat up at night and watched and cared and did not look away. That is what this community is. That is what Crime Files America is. And if you are part of it, and you are not subscribed yet, I genuinely do not understand what you are waiting for. This is the community that keeps these stories alive. And subscribe and be part of it. 2 weeks after the verdict, on May 25th, 2023, the courtroom filled one final time. This was the sentencing hearing. Dozens of people connected to Sarah's life had come to say what they had been carrying inside for 32 years. They came to speak directly to the man who had taken her. Laura Yarborough was the first to stand. She walked to the podium and said that Sarah was our only daughter and the delight of my life. She described the flowers Sarah planted every spring, the way she helped her brothers with their homework, the way she told her mother she felt alive when she danced. She said that she and her husband had about 3 years of their lives that they simply did not remember, that she could barely get out of bed, that their lives went from full color to a fuzzy gray. Then Andrew Yarborough stood, Sarah's youngest brother. He was 11 years old when Sarah was taken, a grown man now. He told the court what he remembered most, the pain in his father's voice on the phone, his parents crying through the walls at night while he lay in bed. He looked toward Nicholas and said that he does not possess the ability to feel remorse the way normal people do, and that he does not belong in free society. One by one, Sarah's friends took the podium. They spoke about milestones that should have been celebrations. Graduations, weddings, the births of their children. Every happy moment shadowed by one missing face. One of Sarah's friends described how some of their classmates had even blamed Sarah for what happened to her. Another spoke about decades of fear. See how trusting strangers became impossible, how they still double-checked their locks at night, how they now parent their own children with a vigilance born from knowing the worst can happen. And then Anne Croney stood up. The woman who had escaped Patrick Nicholas by jumping into the Columbia River in 1983. The woman who swam for her life. The woman whose testimony had been ruled inadmissible during the trial. She had traveled to that courtroom to say what she had not been allowed to say before. When Anne rose from her seat, something happened that no one expected. Patrick Nicholas, the man who had shown no emotion through 9 days of testimony, who had not moved when the guilty verdicts were read, did a double take. He looked at Anne. His body visibly shuddered. He recognized her. He never expected to see her face again, and Anne stood at the podium and spoke clearly. She told the court about the knife, about the river, about the swim that saved her life, and then she said the words that echoed through that courtroom like a verdict of their own. She said that we rely on a system of justice designed to protect us from predators like Nicholas, and that this system failed her, and failed Sarah, and failed Sarah's family, and failed countless others, and she asked the court to please not make the same mistake again. Judge Josephine Wiggs had listened to every word. Before delivering the sentence, she spoke from the bench with a weight that silenced the room. She called Sarah a child. She said, "When I think about this poor child, what she experienced fighting for her life," and as she said it, she brought her fist down on the bench, and that sound rippled through the gallery. Judge Wiggs sentenced Patrick Leon Nicholas to 548 months in prison, 45 years and 8 months, beyond the standard range, justified by the jury's special finding that the crime was sexually motivated. Patrick Nicholas, at 59 years old, would almost certainly die behind bars. He would never walk free again. But here is what everyone in that courtroom already knew. The system had failed 3 separate times. Nicholas's juvenile convictions happened before the national DNA database existed, so his profile was never collected. His 1993 arrest for harming a child should have required a DNA sample under state law, but he was allowed to plead to a lesser charge. And his brother Edward's DNA had been sitting in the national database since 2005. If Washington State had allowed familial DNA searches the way California does, the way New York does, the way Florida and the United Kingdom do, detectives could have matched the crime scene DNA to Edward's profile, traced the family connection, and identified Patrick Nicholas as a suspect in 2005, 14 years before he was actually caught. But Washington State did not allow familial DNA searches, and because of that gap, Patrick Nicholas remained free for 14 more years. In 2025, Nicholas's appeal was heard by the Washington Court of Appeals. His attorneys argued that collecting his DNA from discarded cigarettes was unconstitutional. The court rejected every argument. The conviction stands. And Patrick Nicholas remains behind bars. Sarah Yarborough's case holds a permanent place in history. It was the first cold case ever to use consumer DNA databases to generate investigative leads. What Colleen Fitzpatrick started in 2011 opened the door for hundreds of families to find answers they had been waiting decades to receive. It was the beginning of something that could not have been stopped. Laura Yarborough said after the sentencing that she tries to give Nicholas as little space in her head as possible. She does not say his name if she can help it. She thinks about Sarah instead, about the flowers she planted every spring, about the dances, About the smile, Drew Miller, the boy who found Sarah's body at 13 and carried that image for over 30 years, and said something at the end of it all that may be the most important thing said throughout this entire case. He said that knowing Nicholas is in prison is fantastic, but knowing Sarah's family and friends is way more important to him, because that is what gave him the actual healing he needed. After 32 years, it was not the punishment that healed him. It was the connection, the people, the love that had somehow survived all that darkness. Sarah Yarborough lived by 2 words, carpe diem, seize the day, and she did. Every single day of her 16 years. She danced, she studied, she helped everyone around her, she smiled, she dreamed, she planned for a future that stretched far out in front of her. She lived more in 16 years than most people manage in 80. Until one freezing December morning, as someone stole every single one of her remaining days. Every graduation, every birthday, every quiet evening with the people who loved her. All of it gone. But 32 years later, the people who loved Sarah Yarborough seized something back. They seized justice. They seized answers. They seized the right to stand in a courtroom, say his name out loud, and make him answer for what he did. Sarah did not get to seize any more days, but the people she left behind seized every single one it took to find the truth. Carpe diem, Sarah. The day was finally seized. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is right there where you are watching this from. I want to see every single country represented. Do you think familial DNA searches should be legal in every state? Do you believe the system failed Sarah Yarborough? Or do you think justice was still served in the end? And the question that haunts this case more than any other, when Nicholas asked detectives what year this happened, do you believe Sarah was his only victim? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment on this channel. If this story moved you, if this story made you angry, if this story made you think about the people in your own life who deserve to be protected, please share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Not because I am asking, because Sarah's story deserves to reach every corner of the world she never got to see. Like this video, share it. And if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe to Crime Files America today. Because every story on this channel belongs to someone. And every subscriber is a promise that we are not going to let them be forgotten. I will see you in the next case.